I'm going to break down 2 of my new tracks, Dryad and Nixie. Both are available now on Alex Orion's label Soulless Records. And Dryad I actually wrote over 2 years ago, and since then it's been played all over the world by a bunch of different DJs. Check out Dimitri Molish playing it in Argentina last year. And Simply City was playing it at the Sudbeat party in Sri Lanka just last week. So I'll explain how I made the different sounds and the decisions I made and throw some tips in and around this video. I'll put some of the samples and presets that are used in this project on my Patreon. If you want to download those, click the link in the description below, subscribe, like the video, and comment to let me know which song you'd like me to cover next. All right, let's get started. So this is Dryad. Starting with the kick drum, I have 3 layers of this kick. So I have here the top, kind of like this mid punchy snappiness, this kind of dull click, and then the G kick has a nice punch, a nice sub, and I'm just fading out a little bit so I can make it a little bit shorter. This kick actually comes from one of my sample packs that's available on my Patreon as well. So all 3 together, really nice, sharp, punchy kick. Doing some EQ here, cutting off a little bit of the top end. The kick is in mono, and then I have just a little bit pushing up of the low end with the multiband dynamics. Limiter is actually not doing anything, but let's move on to the bass. For this bass, I have a bunch of different layers as usual, and I've scooped out the mids quite a bit here. This 100 to 200 hertz range is where a lot of muddiness seems to accumulate in these sounds. So I wanted to pull that back, especially if I let you listen here. It's obviously pretty muddy, so that big scoop is helping alleviate some of that muddiness. Then I have a mid-side EQ cutting out anything below pretty high up here, and Track Spacer is my sidechain compressor that I definitely recommend. It's a great tool. I'll put a link to that in the description below. My first layer is the sub layer, and it is a serum, and it's just this monster wavetable with a sub here. This is giving it a little bit of harmonics, even though I'm very aggressively cutting them off. It just makes it feel a little bit warmer. Then I'm using a saturator, and the MIDI looks like this. This higher note is just playing a little bit quieter than the rest, and it gives a bit of a groove. But the best part of this bass line is definitely this main riff right here. This is a really cool sound. It's a bit of a unique groove. It's not like typical rolling bass line. It works really well on the dance floor, and it's kind of a cool groove that I like. You can see that some of the notes are a little bit off the grid to give it a bit of swing. And let's take a listen how this sounds. With the sub. So we'll take a look at this sound here. It is another serum patch, and I'm using a sawtooth to give it a bit of like that lighter side. The other waveform here is an octave lower. So that's the octave higher, and then bringing it down. But that drive is really what's helping it. So the envelope 2 is opening it up like a pluck, and then that drive is really pushing that to make it crunchy. Just a little bit of delay and reverb on the sound itself. And I have a Camel Crusher, which is adding a bit more distortion. Very, very basic without the EQs. In here, I have this audio effect rack. The wet is just a pure delay with some sidechain compression on it, so that when the original sound plays, it's squishing down the delay. So whenever this dry signal is playing, it's squishing down the delayed signal so that they don't overlap each other and build up too much in the frequencies. I have a wider on here, another free plugin, awesome tool, and it is just pushing it up a little bit of the width. A compressor, which just is producing here, and then another compressor. Then I have the riff second layer, just like a high pinching, same MIDI, just to give it a little bit of character. I have this wham sound, which is pretty simple, just like a kind of wah, just to add a little bit of depth to the bass line. barely even hear it. And then I have this one here, and it is the same sound, just with a little bit more EQ and some delay on it to give a little bit of tail. And that just helps to break up the repetitiveness of the bass line. Lastly, I have, it's called an echo sound. Can't even remember exactly how I made this, but it was from a sample of something that I recorded, and then I just changed it quite a bit with some distortions, and then recorded that, and then made this weird sound. For the drums, I have an EQ cutting off the lows, a glue compressor gluing everything together, and then this reverb is just for the actual build-up. You can see here that I have some dry wet coming in, so when the drums are building up in the build-up, it adds that reverb. First layer I have is a hi-hat, 3 layers. Because there's 3 layers, they do build up a lot of frequencies in the high end, so I want to make sure that I'm cutting that out a little bit and taming that. Some mid-side EQ, pushing up the sides a little bit, a saturator. My imager is not loaded in because it's on my old computer. It must have moved it or something. And then some compression. And the MIDI looks like this. Just a little bit of swing and adding in some accent ghost hits to make it more interesting. This drum loop is really great. Just adds so much swing. And it really helps to brighten up the drums and keep them very alive. I always suggest bringing in a pretty processed, swingy loop like this with a lot of detail because it just increases the professionalism of your track by adding in a ton of just like swing and ear candy and making your drum loop just feel super interesting. I have this tight shaker, which is doing the opposite. It's taking the swinginess of it and kind of tightening it back up to make sure that it still feels like it's on the grid. It's still groovy, but not so swingy, so that it tightens up the groove a bit. Nice little clap. Ooh. That's a nice clap. Compression, a little bit of limiting. I probably should have put a clipper on some of these, but I used a limiter instead, and they're pretty similar in that aspect. Another percussive loop. This one's really great because it's very subtle and it adds just a little bit of tone and pitch to the very beginning of the track. Now, I call these identifiers because it helps identify your track. If somebody hears it, this kind of very obvious like rolling pitch, then it's easy to pick up on it. It's not just drums. Some perk accents, so just some hits here. I think I sampled those from a different loop, just cut them out. And then some percussion, just to add a little bit more flavor. I just want to interrupt the video for a sec to let you know that I have actually officially announced my very first masterclass. So if you want to get early access to that masterclass, you can click the link in the description below or up in the card right here, where you can join the waiting list to get early access to my masterclass on how to make deep progressive music like this. There's limited seats available, but once the masterclass is finished, there will be new masterclasses. You can still sign up for the other classes that are coming up after that. Depending on when you're watching this video, there might be a new masterclass already coming up right away. Up next, I have the synths. On the group itself, I have some light EQ cutting out the lows, another sidechain compressor, and I have this lead group with some sidechain compression from the kick, and then I also have sidechain compression from the leads. So the leads are down here, and they sound like this. So that actually conflicts with what I call these ones Big Mama. I don't know why I call them that, but they're this really nice sounding background atmosphere that I just recorded myself. I played the track and I just recorded on my keyboard this very randomized, unquantized feeling. I was just jamming along. I just played along in the scale, and whatever I felt was coming up next, I would play it. A lot of these things are completely off time, but because I used so much reverb and delay, and this Wanderer as well, the Wanderer is a filter delay. It's tons of delay on here, tons of reverb, and that just makes it feel like it doesn't really matter that it's off the grid because it is so atmospheric that it doesn't really need to be on the grid. And this was a way of just getting this nice atmospheric glue throughout the whole track, playing notes within the scale, up and down, just feeling it out and jamming, and it worked out pretty well. And because of this, I also had to put a side chain compressor on here because these leads that are coming in are hitting at the same frequencies. So when these leads play that are the most important part of the track, I want to squish down the other less important atmospheric parts of the track. And it's only when they're playing, so it won't sound like we're losing anything. It'll just kind of replace those frequencies. And that's why Track Spacer is so great, because instead of just ducking the whole sound, it only ducks the frequencies that are overlapping, which is really cool. Then I have this pad sound, which is just another atmosphere. I had this really cool echo sound. A lot of delay on there. We can see the dry wet is at 34%, but I have the feedback up really high. And then I also have the supermassive, which is adding a lot to it as well. With the supermassive. And this is a free download, by the way. Really great tool. Some more echo sounds. I had the lead synth here and just a nice melody. The delay really is what makes it here. I believe it's also being sent to a return track. It's not nearly as interesting without that big delay. And it's again that wanderer and then a shimmer and then a wider, just adding a lot of value and depth to that sound. And then I have an octave coming in here. Same sound, cutting out a lot of the lows, and it just gives it a lot of depth. Again, the Wanderer is such a cool tool for stuff like this because it adds so much of this filtering delay. Adding an octave like this is just such an easy way of adding depth and quality to your track. You can set different settings on both, and say for the higher octave, you can maybe turn it down a little bit, add a bunch of spatial effects or modulation, just really make that sound feel very different than the original sound, and it just works as like a top layer that's more in the background. And again, it can just increase the overall quality and professionalism of a track by having that ear candy, that movement, and it just adds depth to the song. It just fills up so much and it kind of bounces back and forth and it doesn't feel so repetitive and tedious because it's always kind of moving. And that's what I love about using like double delays, doubling up the delay with a Wanderer because it has so much movement to it. Finally, we have some atmospheres here and very simple sounds, just a serum preset called Defiant. Some movement there with the wavetable positions. Then I have some drones that I made. So usually I make these by recording a vocal with a very long reverb and then resampling that reverb. I have a video all about that. I can put that in the corner right here. You can watch that after. This preset is called Into the Abysses. I believe it comes with pigments, and then I just added some saturation, some shimmer onto there, which is a great tool. Adds a really nice background atmospheres as well. Some more that I recorded here. I think this actually came from the pad that I recorded here. And then I have this amazing area pad that I have, same thing, pigments, but I actually drew in some notes. So that sounds really cool. And that preset is called Intro Pad. But then, yeah, it just has this really, really nice shimmery effect. I turn everything off so it sounds like without all the processing. So just like rising and cascading up that kind of scale and then playing it really fast with that nice kind of sharp pad sounded really nice with all that reverb and delay. I won't go into the effects too much because they're pretty boring, but I do have this really nice delayed sound. I took that by taking a percussive element, adding a bunch of delay onto it, and then I made that part of kind of like the atmosphere of the track. Up next, I have a track called Nixie, and this is actually a collaboration with Andreas Bühler, who is actually one of my students. And when he came to me with this track, he wanted some advice on how to improve it, and I actually just saw a lot of potential in it, and I asked him if he wanted to collaborate on it, and this is what came of it. And I'm really excited about this track and really excited to collaborate with Andreas because I know that despite being a new artist, I know he has what it takes to make really good music. And if you want to be like Andreas and get mentorship and coaching from me, then click the link in the description below to learn more information as well. Let's check out the track. Starting with the kick drum, I have two layers. Again, just one for the bass, one for the top. Pretty big sounding kick. The bass group. Infinity bass, it's a really nice tool by Slate Digital. It basically just gives a lot of like warmth and power to your bass. Track spacer, some EQ, pushing up the second octave of bass and pulling down the lower octave of bass. Looks a little bit wonky. First layer I have is this top rolling bass. Which we actually made by resampling a bass with a delay and some filtering, and then we turned it into audio. Actually, the MIDI looks like this. So we go from the D to the F to the B flat or the A sharp, and that gives that kind of melodic aspect of the bass, and then the top rolling sound follows that bass. And it just has a kind of a weird sound to it, so it adds a little bit of character. And the main bass is a serum patch. It's called Dowden Fat Prog bass. Pushing up that second octave of bass, pushing up the bass and pulling down the top end a bit more. We just wanted like the more of the sub coming through, some track spacer from the off bass, and the off bass is an accent to that bass. So it's got a serum preset. It has a kind of like whispery. Oh, look at that. It's an Alex Orion bass that I made from my video a long time ago covering Alex Orion. Now I'm releasing this EP on his label. So that's a full circle moment right there. But yeah, it has just this nice groove to go along with the kick. Pretty nice groove. Let's move on to the drums now. The drum group, EQ cutting out the lows, some reverb for buildups, and some glue compression. First up, we have the hi-hat, 3 layers. Has some nice swing on it. We can take a look at the MIDI. A little bit of groove pool on that, giving it some swing. Some Haas effect on one of the layers to make it a little bit wider, and some EQ, reducing the width a little bit, and then some saturation. 2 layers of clap. Bongo loop. This gate here is actually pulling away a little bit of the bongo loop tail. It's a simple percussive sound. Then I have these really nice bongos that are adding a lot to the track. You can hear this through the whole track from beginning to end, and it's a nice percussive hook because it's simple, it's catchy, it's progressive, and it just works really well throughout the whole track. So you can always catch it, and that just keeps that rhythm, and that keeps you kind of locked into that groove, and it's pretty hypnotic sounding, and that's why I love it in this track. Another loop that's just adding a bit of atmosphere and a bit of variety, so it's not going to be so repetitive, and it's going to be a little bit of ear candy. Is a nice ride cymbal. Main shakers. Some side chain from the actual hat. So when the original hat punches through, it squishes down the shaker so that it makes room for it. Some more shakers over here to add more energy in the final drop. It's another shaker here. With this style of music, this deep melodic stuff, Alex Orion and Solus and Meanwhile recordings, there's a lot of shakers usually. The shakers move and they flow back and forth a lot, and that's what creates a really strong top layer rhythm, and it feels all very glued together and it's not very choppy. Then this tambourine is also adding another layer of that dynamic. It gives it energy, gives it rolling feeling, and it just fills up the empty space. Same with this. And now we can move on to the melodic side of it in the synths and the effects. Melodic group itself, sidechain compression, EQ, and sidechain from the hi-hat, because I felt like the hi-hat was getting buried by all of the brighter synths we had. So I wanted to cut through the mix a little bit with that hi-hat, cutting through some of the sharper high end of the leads. It's this weird rising vocal thing. Kind of almost percussive pluck with a bunch of reverb and a little bit of like colorful distortion. and it's rhythmic, and it just carries the track along very well. Using rhythmic plucks or sounds like this is a really good way of keeping the track kind of glued together by filling up a little bit of that space in the mids, but also keeping it rhythmic like this and kind of fast moving can actually make it feel a little bit more higher energy because you're adding that kind of 16th movement. To do this in your own track, you could do something like this. Do 16th notes of a pluck or a percussive sound, click resample, add a big delay onto there, maybe some reverb, just a dry wet up so it's pretty atmospheric, and then turn on resampling and actually resample by recording the sound. And when you're doing this, change around some parameters in the sound so it records that. So hit record, go into the sound, and now we have this kind of tidbit with the moving of the filter, and I can just grab that section and repeat that in my track. That slight movement is just going to be able to be picked up on your ears. It's very subtle, but of course you can spend more time on this with some different filtering, EQing, and all those different effects. Just making slight adjustments with the EQ and different parameters while you're recording it adds that level of complexity and changes the repetitive nature of it by giving it that bit of humanization and ear candy. This soft lead is kind of just playing in the background. It's very subtle. The soft lead is a Pigments preset called Ancient Menace. It's just like a layer of the lead, and then the lead MIDI itself looks like this. I believe we tweaked the preset a little bit, and then we added in some processing with the stereo widening, an LFO, I think we pushed up the effects a little bit in the lead itself. And then we have a second layer of these plucks, and this is playing a little bit differently than the first layer, and it's adding more depth, and it is playing higher octaves and higher notes, and it just gives a very wide variety of the lead sound, making it feel very professional. This is a Vital preset that we made. So this is actually from my Lane 8 project files. So I made that lead in one of my old videos, and we brought it back in for this one. I don't have Heatwave on this computer, and Tantra is an awesome, awesome tool. We use this, both Andreas and I love using this to create really cool sounds, and then resampling them to throw into the track. I think that's probably how we made that bass earlier in the video. Another round of background plucks. These ones are just adding a bit of this kind of blips in the background, big delay, and that just adds another layer to make it even more dynamic and more pleasing to the ear. The Magic Switch and Pitch Drift are both free, and they are both great. I'll put links to those in the description as well. This adds a bit of chorus and a bit of compression, and this adds a little bit of pitch drifting. So it changes the pitch a little bit and makes it feel more like old school and analog. So this is just like adding another layer of melody to this, and it actually builds up here. And we just increase the MIDI here. Increase the cutoff. And then slowing it down at the end there into the drop kind of swells up the power, and then it brings it back down, and then it drops into the track, and I think that sounds pretty cool. Lastly, some strings, synthetic strings. Adding emotion to that drop, to that breakdown. Just adding a simple extended pad like this, like a screechy pad, gives a bit of expression and makes it even more melodic and kind of accents that goosebump feeling that we're trying to get with this type of breakdown. Some more strings, just adding extra, right? Simple melodies, just keeping it very simple is usually the best thing to do, and just follow the scale and follow the feeling and the vibe and just try different notes. This is also a sound that I know Alex really liked, and it is this womp sound. It's a Pigments preset. Unfreezing it, you can see the preset is called Anfet, and it looks like this. And the other preset is called Morse Code. Usually I change presets a little bit to match the song a bit more. And like I said, you can download these presets on Patreon. The LFO is working on the cutoff, on the timbre of it, or the tone, and then again, it's controlling the wavetable position. So we put some LFOs on here so that it was always changing. If I play that with the kick, it sounds really catchy. That was the intention. It was kind of catchy to go along with the rest of the track. Then we have this other layer doing the same thing, adding another. It's low, fine, kind of gritty sound, and then both those together give a lot of movement, and it sounds very ear-pleasing. Some nice strings, kind of building tension into the breakdown. A drone pad with some movement on it, using a nice reverb. Again, resampling these and adding some movement to them with like Tantra, or just filtering and switching things around with some EQ while you're recording can create this movement in these pads, and then the drones, they feel much more interesting this way. Another drone just to fill up that atmosphere. Vocal here. With some shimmer, just to create a bit more of an atmosphere. Of course, as usual, lots and lots of atmosphere goes into these types of tracks. And just start with one and just keep going through. Add one, see if it fits. If it doesn't, grab something else. If it does, add another one, and then usually you can fill up your track with a bunch of different atmospheres and make sure that they work. Don't overdo it, but make sure they work, and just pick 3 or 4 really good ones and place them throughout your track, and you should be good. If you want to support me, Alex, and Andreas, you can grab this track or stream it using the link in the description below. And if you want to check out another track breakdown, click this video right here.